you hear me? Alex, thank you for that introduction. Really interesting point that Kristen made about people. This conference is about technology. We're hearing about everything from blockchain to artificial intelligence, machine learning, but at the end of the day, behind that tech is human beings. Now, how do we help those people, if you're a manager, if you're a company founder, become the best at what they do, create those products and services? Well, who better to discuss that than the CEO of MANPOWER Group, Jonas Prising, and his chief talent scientist, Chamorro-Premuzic. I'd like to invite them to the stage. Thank you both.
Thank you, Parmy.
All right. Okay, so much to cover here. This is such an important topic because I think people can be lost in the conversation when we talk about technology. We get a bit too caught up in the theory and the gadgets and the electronics. Jonas, let's start with you. When we talk about skills and upskilling people, what are the skills that people are going to need in a future where artificial intelligence has just decimated so many of the jobs that are available today? I'm talking 5-10 years out.
So we might talk about it later in that we don't really believe that it's going to destroy that many jobs. It's going to change the tasks within the jobs, but leave that for a later discussion maybe. We still think that hard skills are going to be important because if you want to be creative, you have to build the creativity on the base of knowledge that you have, so you can't outsource creativity. So hard skills are still going to be important. Maybe more with a science and STEM bent, but at the same time, creativity, communication, collaboration are still going to be extremely important capabilities to have.
And can I just stop to kind of clarify the conversation for everyone? Can you define the difference between hard skills and soft skills? What does that mean exactly?
So hard skills is a clear knowledge about a topic that you have. Soft skills are things that you exhibit and that you can train, that helps you interact with other people and or create and have ideas and innovation and things like that. So you wouldn't have a hard skill topic that's called innovation, but you can learn about innovation and you can apply that. So we think hard skills and soft skills are going to be important. Maybe some of the hard skills are going to shift because knowledge is ubiquitously available to anybody at a moment's notice. But we think that the key evolution that's going to happen in this industrial revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution, is this notion of learnability, the desire and ability to keep on learning. And it's a very different kind of learning than what we've seen in the past. So learn to learn is going to be the evolution and the skill set that individuals will have to acquire to be having a great employability during the course of their careers.
And do you think that's a difficult concept to get across to people? Because with the advent of Google, we've almost become a little bit lazy. You don't really need to learn all 50 United States or European nations or anything like that, because it's all there on the internet, so long as you have a Wi-Fi connection, which you don't always hear, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I think actually it is a very difficult concept because, people, at least in our traditional educational, system, once you graduate, you're done. Yeah. So this is the outcome is to have acquired the hard skills and hopefully some soft skills as well, and then you're done. This is the outcome. So the idea that the outcome has to be hard skills, soft skills, and the ability to learn is a big change. And we know, and many of you here in the audience know, when you put educational materials or online learning available for all of the members of the organization, the take-up rate is actually quite low. So we don't have, in many cases, I believe, this natural desire to learn, with everybody at the scale that's going to be needed.
You can't just throw a book at people and say, oh, that's how you're going to learn. Okay, let's bring this over to Tomas, because one thing I wanted to say before you speak is that you were brought on board at MANPOWER Group to help the company get better at learning how to measure those soft skills, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think, as you said in the introduction, it's easy to forget in a world so obsessed with technology that it's still about people. So long as people are at work, we need to understand them. And in the last 10 years, we have seen unprecedented technological innovations help us scale, our understanding of people. So, imagine for most people, they have maybe very good knowledge of the people they work with every day, the people who are their best friends, maybe their spouses, hopefully their spouses. Imagine that you can today use data, technology, assessment in a way that enables you to have that level of understanding, or even better, of people who you never interacted with in your life. And that knowledge is demonstrated by predicting performance. If you can predict what people do, then you can surely claim that you understand them. If you can't predict what others do, then you don't understand them well.
Okay, so let me give an example of that, if I can just throw this out there. I mean, are we talking, you know, facial recognition in the office where you can see whether people are smiling and happy and productive, or because this is actually, I recently read a report, this is happening in China, like classrooms, to measure the performance of the teacher, check that the kids are actually taking things in. I mean, is that what you're talking about here?
Well, you know, and I don't think that it's only in China. I think, you know, there are organizations piloting different technologies internally. The first thing to state is that everything can and should be done in an ethical way, okay? So I think, and the number one way to ensure that is to give information back to people. If I'm observing what my employees do, or what, you know, potential employees or candidates do via these new technologies, which can be you know, wearables or speech, voice, video recognition, and I gather impressions of them, they would benefit from knowing what that tells them about them. So hey,
this is
you
about
have...
don't keep it to yourself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Don't keep it private. Share it with the employee.
Absolutely,
Okay.
because fundamentally, you know, the perceived asymmetry, or the perceived deal that if the organization reveals what it knows about the employee kind of wins and it doesn't work, or vice versa, is not true. Both parties benefit from mutual understanding. Organizations benefit if they understand employees better, and employees benefit if they're better understood and if they understand themselves better, because today they have a very rudimentary understanding of what their potential actually is.
So just keeping it with you for one other question, and Tomas, on this point of soft skills. You come from an academic background. Was it UCL, did you say? Or?
Yes, and Columbia.
In London, and so you really understand how to measure behavioral science. I mean, how do employers do that now? What are the metrics they need to be looking at?
I think mostly employers and organizations overcomplicate things, because really when we think about employability or the main soft skills that predict whether somebody can do a job well or not, there are only three main attributes that count: ability, likability, and drive. So ability used to be more about hard skills. Now it's increasingly also about soft skills like general intelligence, the ability to adapt, and learnability, which we think is going to become really, really important in the next few years. Likability is being rewarding to deal with. Do you have people skills? Do others enjoy interacting with you or not? And drive is motivation. If you break it down into those three buckets, it's not difficult to assess those things.
But I would say that's really difficult. How on earth do you even begin to measure that?
Well, you know, likability can be evaluated pretty well through peer reviews or other ratings.
That's
if other
true.
people think you're likable, nice, charismatic, they're probably
360
right.
reviews.
Yeah, I mean, self-views are very inaccurate. Most people think they are more likable than they actually are. Most people think they're funnier than they are. Most people think they're more creative than they are. But so feedback is very important. And then hard work, motivation, work ethic, or the willingness to learn, you can assess that via psychometric tests. You can get objective markers, what people actually do, who they relate to, how they email, how often, who, etc. So we have now a surplus of data to make sense of these soft skills. There's no excuse for playing it by ear.
Okay. Jonas, these kinds of things, which I presume are being enabled by software, right? These are old kind of tests. They've been around for a long time, but suddenly we have networks, we have phones, we have Fitbits, we have facial recognition where we can actually start to take that data and process it. What do leaders have to do, you know, if you're a manager, to prevent that sense among a workforce that they are being spied on, essentially? I mean, this was the cover. The Economist had this on the cover a couple of weeks ago. I mean, they're a competitor of ours, but I'll say it anyway. And it was a great story about this actually being a bit of a problem.
And we do believe that, you know, as part of great leadership, if you think about leadership in general, it's about being capable, it's about having a bias for action, but it's about having, you know, a very clear and strong moral compass with ethical values and being altruistic, so, you know, putting others before self. If you're not paying attention to those last two aspects, it could become a very big issue. So I think it is a very dicey navigation that we are walking towards. And I think you see some of the, you know, the challenges within the area of data and how different parts of the world are thinking about it differently. So GDPR, so the protection of personal data here in Europe is, you know, this month becoming, you know, the law of the land with very heavy sanctions. And we think that eventually the same kinds of rules will apply to the use of data, because we will have almost unlimited amounts of data about what people do, where they are, whether they talk to a lot of people, whether they spend a lot of time working, whether they're, you know, effective, you know, remotely. Because a lot of organizations today have a very tough time defining productivity of employees in most positions. There are some positions that are very easy to define, but a lot of positions are very hard to define.
And can I give you an example of that? I recently interviewed a startup in London which was selling software to employers to measure how many emails each of their staff was sending every day. And they had like this kind of chart where they could see, oh, Bob is doing really well. He sent 20 emails yesterday before 10 a.m. But is that really a good metric to measure productivity? And as you say, like, there are so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing in some of these startups. The idea that some of these metrics are good predictors of future performance is erroneous. So this difference between correlation and causality and, you know, what is really important and what do we want to achieve, I think has a lot of different indicators that may not at all have anything to do with eventual performance. And, you know, I know from talking a lot to Tomas that a lot of the things that are happening today that are pretending to be predictable and data-based, in actual fact, have a very low degree of scientific validity. So it's fun, it's entertaining, but it may not actually be predicting any improvement in performance and or likelihood to be better at one's job.
Exactly, and it is cool to be able to look at the numbers and feel that sense of validation. Oh, I've really got the metrics down pat. How do you, as an employer, know that actually none of this is that useful or valid from a scientific point of view, as you say?
So, you know, the good news is that the mechanisms and the processes for testing whether something works, whether it has ROI, have been in place for a long time, okay? So, to use the example that you gave, it might be that the quantity and variety of emails that people send on an average day is indicative of their drive, engagement, ambition. But there's a way to find out. Let's track those people, see whether they stay longer, see whether they are rated more favorably on 360s, see whether they meet or exceed their KPIs. And let's also use theory. There are scientific and theoretical reasons to actually suspect that there is a connection between that activity at work and these underlying facets of potential. You know? And I give you another really good example that highlights how you can use some of these technological advances for ethical or at least progressive liberal means. The researchers at MIT use sociometric badges to literally tag employees for 4 or 5 weeks. And they measured everything they said, did for 4 or 5 weeks. It feels very intrusive, of course, to identify whether men and women were treated in the same way at work. And what they found is that from a data analytics perspective, men and women were identical. They were doing exactly the same thing. They were speaking as much in meetings. They were interacting as much with people from the same and other gender. And yet,
the data doesn't lie.
On average, they got promoted 25% as often as men. So imagine, how else would you actually demonstrate that there is bias if you don't have all this data? If you don't have it, we rely on these kind of inferences, guesses or stereotypes. Oh, maybe they're not leaning in. Maybe they're not bold. But we can actually use data to answer that question.
Right. And sorry, just to clarify, did you say the women were promoted 25% less? Okay,
exactly.
Got it.
Less.
So Jonas, it sounds like with all of this, am I right in saying as a takeaway, if anyone is an employer here, runs a company, if they want to upskill their workforce, measure more, but disclose to your employees what you're collecting about them, basically? Or is there more to it?
Yeah, no, I think that would be definitely a very clear direction to take. We will have to treat this data with the responsibility that we treat all other data, and in many cases this is more sensitive data because we may be uncovering things that are not even known to the individual. So to Tomas's point, a great way of having development and learning conversations with the people so that they themselves have this desire to improve themselves and to learn from what the situation is.
Let's talk about that point, actually. You mentioned learning and kind of improving themselves, and this is something that everybody has to have in mind in an age where technology is moving so quickly. Are my skills still going to be relevant as they are in 5-10 years' time? When people talk about the gig economy, there's a lot of sense that actually you're in this game on your own, but how much do employers still need to step in and actually help people retrain themselves? Should employers be providing programs, or is that something that people just need to do on their own?
We definitely believe that the ability to upskill and reskill your workforce is going to be a core capability of any organization for a number of reasons. You mentioned one of them, which is the very rapid evolution of technology, which requires new skills to take advantage of those technologies. There are demographic reasons. Most of the populations in the developed world are stagnating and or shrinking, so the talent pools are getting smaller. And the technology moves so quickly that you will want to make sure that you move your workforce population along with the changes while you still have time to make the transition. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you analyze your workforce and you'll say, well, 30% of them will no longer be part of the plans for the next 5 years because their starting level is too low. So whenever you're in a situation like that, it's a crisis, because the likelihood to make a successful company transformation while changing out 30 or massive amounts of your workforce are extremely low, and it's very, very high risk. So it is essentially going to be a driving force to run a better business, to continue to educate and to enable individuals to learn while they are there. We also think it's one of the reasons you'll choose to work for companies, because the employment contract in terms of jobs for life, that promise is out. Most individuals coming into the workforce today, they know this is not going to be the case, that it's not realistic. So your employer branding and your employer promise has to be something else. And if it is that you can come and work with my organization, our organization, in our team, and we don't know for how long, but we can promise you this: when you leave, you will be more marketable in terms of your skills, so it'll be easier for you to find a different position within our organization or outside the organization.
That's a very interesting way of pitching to a new employee. Come and join us so that you can leave us even better in 5 years' time. Basically, would you say?
Well, I think the idea that as an organization, your workforce and anybody that joins you is joining a closed system is an outdated view. It's an open market. So whether you like it or not, you are competing on the open market even with all of your employees that are in the organization. And especially, those that have the skills that are highly attractive on the market, they're highly mobile. They will move if they don't feel that they can progress.
Yeah, and I was going to say, this is a quote that has been attributed to many people, Warren Buffett, Henry Ford, but Jonas now as well. The only thing worse than training your people to see them leave is not training them and have them stay, right? So you can't gamble. There is no option. You have to.
Then you just stagnate, right?
Exactly.
But presumably that means that the employers of today need to do a better job and spend more money training their employees than their forebears of 10 years ago. I mean, it's not just a matter of continuing, but actually doing more.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the comments from the participants at Tech for Good, and we were represented there as well, you can see all of the companies talking about how many people they are committed to reskilling and upskilling in their organization and outside of their organization. Just as we at Manpower Group here in France at this conference, we're launching, the ability for online courses for digital skills for 360,000 of our temporary employees. So companies are doing this today, so it's no longer anecdotal and it's no longer a wish, but of course it's not enough just to have the larger organization doing it. It has to be more ubiquitous, and that's much harder for smaller and medium-sized organizations to afford. The technology helps because it's not as expensive, But I think that that's where the shift comes in terms of the protection and the move in the support systems. And I think France, for instance, is making some very bold moves from job security and providing employment security. So now every individual has his or her own training portfolio in terms of a fund that they can deploy to buy training. And that's a highly innovative idea, leveraging the social support network and system that exists in France, but applying it to a digital world. So it becomes forward-looking as opposed to, rearward-looking. And that's a great innovation to see here in the French market.
Yeah. And of course, that's state-provided, right? This is one of Macron's reforms. Did you have anything to say on that, Thomas? It looked
Not
like
on
you were
that.
about
It's
to
a brilliant answer.
I was going to ask if you can you bring it down to earth with some examples? You talked about technology being used to retrain people. What are some ways that employers can do this? I mean, when you imagine what that really means in practice, is it just taking people on a retreat 2 days on a conference? Do someone with a flip chart, couple of hours, or what does it really mean? What's the best way to actually train your employees?
Well, I think the idea and the interesting evolution is this intersection between human and technology. So if you go to our booth, a little bit down the hall, you'll see how we're using virtual reality to train our associates that are going to be working on a construction site or in a food preparation site. You will see us using augmented reality in terms of understanding how you stack shelves in the right way, or what kind of safety equipment is used for what purpose. So it is doing what we used to do before, but in a completely different and a more engaging way. And I think that's really the evolution that you're seeing. So it's not that we're going from one activity to completely different activity. We're augmenting our activities, leveraging the technologies so that it becomes more interactive and more engaging, and frankly also much more efficient for the individual as well as for the companies.
Yeah, makes sense. Use the tools that are there, might as well use them. I wonder if we can just, in the last part of this discussion, bring it back down the chain, as it were, to education and to kids and the education systems. Because when we talk about reskilling people now as grown-ups, it's very different to, preparing kids for a future where, as I said in the beginning, a lot of people do say artificial intelligence driven models are going to completely upend the workforce. How on earth do you prepare children for a future like that, whether you're a parent or a teacher?
I think we will see the very significant evolution of educational institutions. If you think back about the industrial or technology-driven changes that we've seen in the past, they have always been accompanied by an education and skills revolution. So when we moved from an agrarian society to an industrial society, compulsory schooling for all children. It went from children are active and working to, by law, everybody has to get educated and have at least 6 years, 9 years of schooling. And then we see the post-industrial area moving into the next phase. We moved into the affordability of higher education, because while university education existed, it was extremely elitist and extremely unaffordable for the vast majority of people. So at that point, all industrial nations made it affordable for their citizens to participate in higher education. And we think this fourth industrial revolution will drive the next revolution in education. And it will look something like this, we believe. Hard skills are important. Soft skills are always important, but the learnability and how you do this, the speed with which you can acquire new knowledge, will be the next evolution, we believe, to keep pace with what needs to be, the outcome of your schooling.
This is learning how to learn. Tomas, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, and just to add that, obviously, it's a lot easier to learn when we are younger. There's a lot more neuroplasticity, and we absorb much. We're actually more curious as kids than as adults, where we learn to accept things and follow rules, and then we like our rules so much that we don't want to break them. So, of course, it makes sense to tackle it from an early age. I think, if you want to be a winner in education in the near future, and you can show that you are nurturing or increasing things like learnability, curiosity, entrepreneurship, and self-awareness, you're going to be in trouble. If you just say, oh, we work as an elitist, degree or kind of badging institution where we showed that people have worked hard, studied, and memorized facts, who's going to be interested in that? Already today, organizations and employers complain that even people from top universities and top schools come ill-prepared and that they need to train them almost from scratch. So those are going to be the differentiators.
I think it was a couple of years ago that Ernst & Young said that they were actually going to stop looking at degrees as a sort of a qualifier for people that come in as graduates or something like that. Like, to that extent, it's become so commoditized, it's just sort of worthless almost to some
More
employers.
skills-based, more certification-based, less degree-based.
So, Tomasz, bringing it back to you, how are people going to be measuring this? Because there are apps out there, for example, like Debut in the UK, where graduates can do a series of tests on the app, numeracy, learn about their personality, their passions, and employers are looking at that as a way to understand what the person is like. And those are kind of more along the soft skills you were talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things like general intelligence, curiosity, drive, motivation, we have measured those things with scientific tests for 50 or 60 years. But now AI and machine learning algorithms can make those tests much quicker, more engaging, and combine that with other data points. You know, the main limitations are ethical or legal. There is a difference today between what we could know and what we should know about people. But as said, this can be done in a legal, transparent, and ethical way, where, again, we need to empower people to own the data, at least see the results, and learn from those results so that they can actually unlock their potential, as opposed to keep that information private and utilize without their consent.
That's a big ask because you're saying we have to empower people, but ultimately it's institutions who have been holding on to that kind of data for decades. It's a really big ask, and you need something as kind of bold and crazy as GDPR to kind of start to turn it around. Jonas, maybe we could just sort of finish with you, but maybe just on the point of education. Children are the future, that sort of thing. What hope is there, considering that people look at, for example, the education system in Britain, very target-based, very test-driven. I mean, is there really hope for systems like that to turn around, to focus more on the soft skills and the relevant skills for a digital workforce in the future?
I think we have every reason to be optimistic, and I think you can start to see organizations leading the way in how they're thinking about new skills, how they're recruiting from different talent sources, and all of that means that I think we'll start to see the shift occurring, because generally speaking, education happens today the way it happened 45 to 50 years ago. It's sequential, it is time-based, it is degree certification-based. And I think that's where the shift is going to be. But the good news is with technology, you are able to leapfrog and you are able to accelerate it, but you do have to have both the ideological, political, as well as the market-based will to make those changes.
Yeah, so all the stakeholders have to be on board.
Everybody has to be participating.
All right, well, Jonas and Tomasz, thank you so much. This is a really fascinating discussion. Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks everyone. Thank you, Parmy.